Today, there is growing anxiety on the right over the results of a Texas special election that the Wall Street Journal editorial board summed up like this. How does a Republican lose by 14 points in a safe, conservative Texas state Senate seat that President Trump carried by 17 points in 2024? Answer: when there's a voter backlash against the Trump administration, notably its mass deportation debacles. Here's the victor, Democratic Taylor Remnant, a union leader and first-time candidate, talking to MS Now's Joe Scarborough about how he won big in that deep red district.
And a place like Fort Worth, Texas, when you knocked on doors, had people that had voted Republican their whole life decide to vote for you.
To me, it was simple. We had to focus on solutions, not partisan politics, bringing communities together.
This is one of those moments where you can actually feel the political ground shifting. Democrats just flipped a Texas state Senate seat that had been deep red for years. A district Trump won by roughly 17 points in 2024. Democrats just took it by about 14 points. That's a net swing of 30 points toward the Democrats in a suburban Fort Worth district that Republicans considered practically untouchable for decades. 30 points in Texas, in a district that was supposed to be impenetrable. Let that sink in.
Is reporter for the Texas Tribune. Julie Roginski is a Democratic strategist and author of the Salty Politics newsletter on Substack. So, Alejandro, what propelled this victory? What can you tell us?
Thank you for having me. I think there's a couple of things on the ground here in Texas that people are still litigating. One is obviously the circumstances surrounding the election. It was on January, Saturday, and right after a cold snap here in Texas that affected campaigning and voting. But also it is the national discourse and the politics that we just heard about at the beginning of the segment, that might this be a response to the president's policies? And also in Tarrant County, there's a lot of local GOP leaders who have angered residents in numerous ways through their socially conservative policies. So that's one of the big questions right now is, was this a response to that?
The Republican candidate in this race wasn't some random nobody running a poorly funded campaign. She was Trump's personally endorsed candidate, someone he publicly called a true MAGA warrior, someone he blasted to his massive Texas network and urged millions of supporters to vote for. He staked his personal reputation on this race, and she lost by 14 points. The winner was Taylor Remnant, a union leader, a first-time candidate, someone most people outside Fort Worth had never heard of 6 months ago. He walked into a district Republicans had dominated for decades and walked out with 57% of the vote. Trump's reaction was immediate and revealing. He told reporters with a straight face that he wasn't really involved, that it was just a local Texas race, that endorsements aren't necessarily transferable. This is the same man who called her a MAGA warrior by name, who sent message after message to his Texas network demanding turnout. Now that she's lost by 14 points in a district he won by 17, suddenly he had nothing to do with it. Nobody's buying that. Not Democrats, not Republicans, and certainly not the strategists watching this play out ahead of 2026. Texas Lieutenant Governor Dan Patrick called it a wake-up call. The losing candidate herself acknowledged that Democratic voters turned out in force, while Republican voters simply stayed home. That admission matters. Despite a Trump endorsement, despite the full weight of the Texas Republican establishment, despite direct appeals all the way to Election Day, their own voters didn't show up. That's the story here. Not just that Democrats won, but how. Democratic energy right now is exceptional for an off-cycle race. The chaos of Trump's second term, the court battles, the executive overreach, the constitutional conflicts, has turned into a massive mobilization engine for the left. Meanwhile, the raw intensity that made MAGA such a powerful grassroots force is measurably fading. NBC News polling flagged it in late 2025. The Texas results confirmed it in real time. And Trump's endorsement is losing its power in ways that should terrify Republican candidates heading into competitive races. A year ago, his backing was a golden ticket. Candidates restructured entire campaigns to win it. But if his endorsement can't move the needle in a solidly red Texas district, what exactly does it do for someone running in Pennsylvania, Michigan, Arizona, or Wisconsin, where margins are razor thin and every vote counts? Republican strategists are staring at that question right now, and they don't have a good answer. The 30-point swing can't be dismissed as a local quirk. This fits into a consistent pattern of Democratic overperformance across special elections throughout Trump's second term. It's not one data point, it's a trend, and trends that show up this clearly this early tend to get larger, not smaller, as a general election approaches. Trump can call it a local race all he wants, but political memory is long, and the receipts are public. He backed her. He campaigned for her. She lost by 14 points in his territory. Every Republican candidate facing a real fight in November 2026 is watching that and doing the math. The MAGA magic is dimming. The voter enthusiasm gap is real and widening, and it's showing up exactly where it matters most, at the ballot box on Election Day.
Let me just tell you, the US Supreme Court has ruled against Donald Trump's global tariffs enacted back in April under federal law meant for national emergencies. These are the pictures live from the Supreme Court. We've been expecting that ruling for a number of weeks, and it's been held back and held back. It has just emerged, and it is significant because Donald Trump has lost. And of course, you will remember that tariffs have been his go-to policy, his weapon he has used so many times. It started, you will remember, back in April, what he described as Liberation Day, when he announced the whole sweeping range of tariffs for all sorts of countries with a basic baseline of 10%. You'll remember the pictures from the Rose Garden in the White House, where Donald Trump was there with his blackboard and a variety of figures for different countries in terms of the tariffs.
Here's the kicker. The Supreme Court didn't just rule against Trump on tariffs. They took the immunity shield he thought was bulletproof and turned it against him. The ruling is unambiguous. The sweeping tariffs he imposed under claimed emergency powers are illegal and unconstitutional. Gone. Not reduced, not modified. Gone. But this decision reaches far beyond tariffs. Legal analysts across the political spectrum are calling it a nuclear ruling, one that fundamentally redefines what presidential immunity actually means and strips away the broad legal protection Trump has leaned on throughout his entire second term. This isn't a setback. It's a structural collapse of the legal framework he built his presidency around.
Today, I will sign an order to impose a 10% global tariff under Section 122, over and above our normal tariffs already being charged. And we're also initiating several Section 301 and other investigations to protect our country from unfair trading practices of other countries and companies. A new record. We set a record every time. Well, thank you very much for being here. The Supreme Court's ruling on tariffs is deeply disappointing, and I'm ashamed of certain members of the court, absolutely ashamed, for not having the courage to do what's right for our country. I'd like to thank and congratulate Justices Thomas, Alito, and Kavanaugh.
On February 20th, 2026, the Supreme Court issued a ruling that will define Trump's second term, and not in the way he expected. In Learning Resources Inquin vs. Trump, the court ruled 6-3 that the International Emergency Economic Powers Act does not give the president the power to impose tariffs, not limited tariffs, not targeted ones, not temporary emergency tariffs, none. Chief Justice Roberts, writing for the majority, was explicit. The act cannot support tariffs that are unbounded in scope, amount, or duration. Trump's entire global tariff strategy, the thing he called Liberation Day, the cornerstone of his economic agenda, wiped out in a single ruling. But the real bombshell isn't the tariffs. It's what this ruling does to the legal framework Trump built his entire second term around. After the earlier Trump versus United States immunity ruling, Trump and his legal team operated under a simple belief: official acts are shielded from judicial review, emergency powers are broad, and the courts will defer. That assumption gave him the confidence to push executive authority further than any modern president on tariffs, immigration enforcement, funding freezes, targeting of law firms, firing of inspectors general. The legal logic was always the same. This is an official act. It's protected. The Supreme Court just dismantled that logic. The ruling establishes a clear principle. Claiming official authority or declaring a national emergency doesn't automatically make presidential actions legal or unreviewable. Courts will now look past the label and examine whether the underlying statute actually grants the power being claimed. If it doesn't, the action is struck down, regardless of how official it looks. That principle doesn't stay contained to tariffs. It applies to every controversial executive action Trump has taken by stretching questionable statutory authority. The immigration enforcement orders, the funding freezes, the executive orders targeting private law firms, all of them were defended with the same broad claims of statutory authority and presidential immunity. The court has now told every judge in the country, don't just defer, look at the statute. If the authority isn't there, strike it down. What makes this ruling especially devastating is the vote breakdown, 6-3, with Roberts, Gorsuch, and Barrett joining the three liberal justices. Two of Trump's own appointees voted to strike down his signature economic policy. The narrative that his three nominations created a reliable protective majority on the court is finished. If Gorsuch and Barrett are willing to declare his use of emergency powers illegal, he can no longer govern with the assumption that the Supreme Court has his back. Trump's reaction confirmed he understands exactly what this means. His supporters framed the ruling as the court stripping away his tools to protect the economy, which is really just an admission that his entire governance strategy was built on powers the court just declared never existed. The political fallout is just as severe. Republican candidates spent months defending these tariffs as a necessary sacrifice to protect American workers and bring manufacturing home. The Supreme Court just ruled those tariffs were an illegal overreach. Every Republican who backed them now has to answer for defending unconstitutional economic policy that raised prices for American families. Democrats don't need to write attack ads for 2026. The Supreme Court just wrote them. His tariffs were illegal. You paid more because the president broke the law. Republicans defended it. And this is just the beginning. The tariff ruling sets a precedent that will echo through every remaining legal challenge to Trump's executive actions. Each new case will use this ruling to argue that his claimed authority exceeded what Congress actually granted. The protective bubble is shrinking, not because the court changed the rules of immunity, but because it's now drawing the boundaries of what actually qualifies as a legitimate official act versus what only pretends to be one. Trump spent his second term operating under the illusion that emergency powers were a blank check and immunity was a permanent shield. The Supreme Court, including the justices he put there, just told him otherwise. That's the real bombshell.